A wave of foreclosures hits the state of Florida. Out of the top 10 cities in the United States with the most foreclosures, 5 are in Florida. On today's video, we're going to talk about how we got here. Superficially, we could generalize that Florida got here with a combination of immigration laws and hurricanes, but there's a few flaws with that theory. Lakeland, Florida is number 1 for foreclosures, and it's far inland with no hurricane damages. As of today, there are 64 foreclosures listed in Polk County, with the overwhelming majority of them being along Highway 27 near Davenport. Bizarre enough, the reason why many people move to Polk County where Lakeland sits is because of the transparency of their sheriff's office. An intriguing fact, considering that Polk County Sheriff's Office doesn't even have body-worn camera on their officers. The overwhelming majority of the growth was in the Davenport area, proximity to Orlando theme parks. When Davenport was in the peak of its growth, I made this video here, and the title was Orlando's Fastest Growing Suburb, a Suburban Wasteland of Cookie Cutter Homes. Just over a year later, this suburban cookie cutter wasteland, as I named it, leads the nation in foreclosures. Many of the foreclosures seem to be these type of buildings here. 2-story, large 4-bedroom houses stacked right on top of each other with long commutes and extraordinarily low prices, built in areas where land was affordable. This particular type of construction attracted people who wanted a big home but simply couldn't afford it in the city, so they bought it inside of these communities, where you could get a giant new house for less than half of what it would cost in the city, with all types of move-in incentives by the builders, developers, and realtors. Soon enough, people bought these houses that couldn't afford them. And it's not a surprise that today, when you look at the bulk of foreclosures in Polk County, it seems that these 2-story houses in these type of subdivisions dominates the volume of houses listed on foreclosures. And there's really a reason behind this, which is the following. People want a giant house in the city, but they can't afford it, so they settle for these cheaply built houses in these subdivisions. Eventually, they run into hurricane damage, even if they're far inland, because of how crappily built they are. When they have warranty issues, the builders seem to be nowhere, and eventually they're left with a house that's nothing more than a pile of plywood and OSB in a state where this type of construction really doesn't last that long. Maintenance issues start to pile up, the builders and warranties are nowhere to be found, and then the most fatal mistake, the assumption that they were going to make as much money in Florida as they were in New York or California. See, these are individuals that believe the political-based economic hype of Florida and fail to notice the fact that this state has some of the lowest incomes for most professions in the country. For example, the state of Florida has the worst paid law enforcement in the nation, the worst paid teachers in the nation. Knowing how economically deprived Lakeland, Florida is, to me it isn't a surprise that this city is in this situation. I Uber drive in this city, and it's bizarre to hear people tell me that they moved here because the governor promised them great paying jobs and Grady Judd is the best sheriff in America. That's really the reason why you moved to one of the most economically deprived cities in the state of Florida. Another bizarre city on this list is Jacksonville at number 6. Jacksonville hasn't got hit by hurricanes, and out of all Florida's large urban cores, this city has the least undocumented people or immigrant communities. So that doesn't check out very well. So what happened in Jacksonville? Why did Jacksonville end up on this list? And nobody is moving to Jacksonville for safety. In fact, after talking to people that have recently moved out of Jacksonville, that's the reason they're leaving the city. And while Jacksonville doesn't have a large immigrant community, the immigrant community that it does have is solely responsible for the entire bulk of the city's economic growth over the last 6 years. And that is because as the residents of Jacksonville are moving out over safety concerns, the people that are moving into migrant communities were revitalizing districts like East Jacksonville and Arlington, areas that had practically gone into destruction and decay practically All that was revitalized with the influx of people. In that time period, a wave of Hispanics and Asians resettled these neighborhoods in the city that before were clearly in decline. Now, I haven't been in Jacksonville in a little bit, but I just talked to a neighbor here in Lakewood Ranch who recently moved from Jacksonville, and he told me that immigration changes hit the economy of Jacksonville hard. So much so that it crippled the city's economy, and that's the reason he got out of Jacksonville. Now, Jacksonville's least desirable attribute has always been the lack of safety in the city. Economically, however, this city outshined all of other Florida cities like Orlando, Tampa, Miami. Nothing came close to the economical feasibility of living in Jacksonville. For example, I've done rideshare in Jacksonville, and it is by far more profitable than anything else in Florida. Jacksonville has been the easiest place to make a living in this state. It's the most affordable of all of Florida's larger cities. Businesses from Tampa, Miami were literally moving up to Jacksonville just so they could stay with their heads above water with the cost of real estate. It's almost like if parts of Jacksonville became Miami over the last few years. Florida's always been a big hit with Hispanics, so it's no surprise that Jacksonville would eventually have an influx of Hispanics. But then they also have a large and very fast-growing Asian community, and that exists almost nowhere else in Florida. Now, before this wave of foreclosures and real estate crash unfolded in Florida, if you've watched my Jacksonville videos, you may remember me mentioning that most, if not all, of the city's growth and economical activity was revolving around these particular communities. So even a city like Jacksonville that isn't endemically a diverse city has suffered tremendously from the immigration impacts. And as people were moving out of Jacksonville because of safety concerns, the buyers were always this particular demographic, and that demographic doesn't exist anymore as a buyer base. Now, while Jacksonville has had a lot of foreclosures, they're not sitting around on the market too long because they're significantly more affordable than other parts of the state. Many people are buying these up instantly. So Jacksonville and Lakeland are two cities that illustrate that it isn't just hurricanes and immigration issues what's causing the problem in Florida, at least not at a first glance. So now let's dive into other cities that are definitely in trouble right now for reasons that are a little bit more easy to understand. Cape Coral and Fort Myers are number 3 on that list, and this one's pretty simple to understand, especially since I spent 20 years of my life in this metropolitan area. Cape Coral is pitched as a master plan community with the largest canal system in the world. The problem is that the city streets turn into a canal system themselves, even larger than that, whenever it rains. That is because the more Cape Coral grows, the less land there is available. The higher the houses go, the less places the water has to go, despite the canal system. To summarize the widespread flooding throughout most of the city of Cape Coral, we could just call it a master failed community, where the more it grows, the more it agitates the problem, which means that this city right now is in a horrible situation. If it continues to grow, it's going to continue to agitate the problem. On top of that, property taxes in Cape Coral are among the highest in the state, and after hurricanes or whenever the local government has to do anything, they seem to be the least proficient. Where's all that money going? Now, Cape Coral is nothing more than single-family homes, but next door is the city of Fort Myers, which is kind of like the industrial and commercial hub of this metropolitan area. And Fort Myers recently had the highest percentage of its population that is of temporary status in the country. Cubans, Haitians, only the city of Miami had a higher percentage of its population as new arrivals in the United States. So recently, Fort Myers had a massive infusion of people come to the city. Most of those people, Cubans and Haitians, recent arrivals, just had their temporary statuses revoked. Their work permits are pulled, their driver's licenses became invalid. So these were people that were legally set up to work in the United States. Here comes an administration, rips that up from underneath them, and it sends the city of Fort Myers into complete chaos. Tice, right on the outskirts of Fort Myers, has the largest Guatemalan community by percentage of the population of anywhere in the United States. Guatemalans are predominantly undocumented, working in construction. These communities are vulnerable to economic changes. During the last recession, Fort Myers was the hardest hit, only Las Vegas had a worse situation with foreclosures during that last recession. So it isn't a surprise of all the building that's happening in Fort Myers that when this bubble bursts, that Fort Myers will again be affected. And already the amount of real estate available in Fort Myers is insane. Just in the last 7 days, there have been over 1,100 new listings in the Fort Myers MLS and almost 1,300 price reductions. 3 years ago, Hurricane Ian hit Fort Myers, and insurance rates in this city are insane. For people who bought houses in Fort Myers in a flood zone, their insurance is now more than their mortgages. This metropolitan area also has zip codes where car insurance can be almost 3 times higher than the national average. Now, along the coastline of Fort Myers Beach, where cars were 15 feet underwater during Hurricane Ian, you would think that's where insurance rates would be the highest, right? But that isn't the case. It's the zip codes that are predominantly Hispanic that have the highest insurance rates for vehicles. Most of the new home construction in the Fort Myers area took place in areas that have the most abysmal infrastructure of anywhere in the United States. Most people are on well water. That water stinks. It's disgusting. You got to have these expensive purification systems. Most people are on septic tanks. They don't have city sewage. Internet signal out here is almost non-existent. It's not a surprise that people that bought homes in these places with these conditions are now regretting it. Ocala, Florida came in at number 5 for the most foreclosures in the United States. With areas like the Villages, this is an area that has had a lot of new home construction for a lot of reasons. Predominantly, people looking for affordability in South Florida have looked to the Ocala area as a more affordable housing market. The problem that people have found in this housing market, however, is that Ocala has literally no jobs, limited to healthcare at that. And residents living here complain that healthcare in Ocala is horrendous. After Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, many people from Puerto Rico sold their houses and properties on the island and moved to Ocala. But what they found here wasn't exactly the American dream. It's a city that's economically deprived with very little economic opportunity, and many people are now returning to Puerto Rico. Among the chief complaints for people leaving the Ocala area is number 1, the lack of job opportunities, and number 2, anti-Hispanic sentiment and racism has made a lot of people feel uncomfortable in their own communities and inside their own homes. I talked to business owners in the Ocala area who told me that on a regular basis they have customers walk through the doors asking if they could please have food on credit until they get paid because they literally have nothing to eat in their homes. Jobs here do not pay enough to live. Gig work is literally non-existent. Doesn't matter how affordable Ocala is. If you can't make enough money to live, people aren't going to be able to pay their houses. An influx of people from South Florida also moved to Ocala for affordability, and they're all facing the same problem. Nobody can make enough money to live here. Ocala also has an overdose death rate that's more than twice the state average. Subdivisions like Marion Oaks on the outskirts of the city are not hard to come across. Entire blocks where every single house is empty. They build too many houses and literally nobody's buying them. Many construction sites are becoming paralyzed as there's houses built but no buyers in sight. Ocala had a massive economic boom because of Puerto Ricans moving here after Maria destroyed the island. And as the prices increased in South Florida, many people from Miami moved up here. But at this moment, nobody's moving to Ocala, and all these new houses do not have buyers. And the people that did buy these houses with mortgages are now wondering how the crap they're going to pay for it. On top of that, it goes without saying that there's no beaches in Ocala. There isn't much to do up here, and the population of people here are mostly old, bitter people from up north. This isn't exactly a beach town with happy retired faces. These are people who couldn't afford to live in a beach town. Now they're bitter in Central Florida. Number 8 on that list is Brevard County, places like Palm Bay, Melbourne, Vieira, and Titusville. Known as Florida's Space Coast, that really is the largest industry here, and it does bring high-paying jobs to the area. This is Vieira. It's a mediocre suburb of Melbourne that, because of those aerospace jobs, has become extraordinarily overpriced. Now, before we talk about Vieira, let me give you guys some context on what is Brevard County. I recently did a video on Brevard County and I labeled it the land of misery. On our last trip to Brevard County, some of the things that I witnessed were just heartbreaking. There's a lot of problems in this community. It's literally every time we go to this area, we see some wild crap. Parents that live in Brevard County can't even take their kids to parks. They're mostly just overrun by homeless people. So this is a county that has an overdose death rate that has been consistently among the top 3 highest in Florida for like the last 5 years. The poverty and misery that exists in Brevard County, particularly in remote rural communities, is staggering. This is the type of place that gives you the chills. Last time we were out here, there were literally lines with hundreds of people waiting at food distribution centers. It's not like there was a hurricane or a natural disaster. This is just another weekend in Brevard County. People here literally do not have money for food. So how do you expect people that don't have money for food to be able to have money to pay a mortgage? We were just in Brevard County documenting the misery and poverty that exists in this county. My videos were highly criticized by people who moved there, those elite people that get those jobs in places like Viera. But this is really the reality of Brevard County, Florida. Don't get it twisted. Not everybody lives in Viera here and has a job working for NASA. So this is the mentioned Viera. It's a suburb similar to Lakewood Ranch on the East Coast. Now, I live in Lakewood Ranch. I've been here for 3 years. Viera can't come close to Lakewood Ranch. It is a nice suburb. The prices here do not correlate with the reality of this place. The beaches don't tally up to that number. Yes, there are great jobs, but even those great jobs do not excuse the prices here. Literally, renting an apartment here in Viera almost puts you at $3,000 a month. There's nothing in this county that is worth that kind of money. Because of the jobs and because of the industries that are here, the real estate appreciation grew and the rents grew, and well, it didn't correlate with reality. It was just way too overvalued. Now, this county is predominantly white population. There aren't too many immigrants here, so that's not a factor in this community. And there haven't been hurricanes on the East Coast in Florida. This is not a hurricane alley. So you don't have immigration reasons. You don't have any of the hurricane reasons. So why exactly are there so many foreclosures here in Palm Bay in this Brevard County? Now, one thing that I've been doing when I visit cities is I'm Uber driving, I'm doing rideshare, and I'm talking to people in the community about the problems they face. So the cities that we're talking about in today's videos, I'm not just driving around these cities like many people say. I'm spending hours talking to people that live in these cities to find out what their concerns are about these communities. And I did spend a good deal of time Uber driving people in Brevard County and talking to them about what they perceive is wrong with their community or what's great about their community. And overall, most of the people that I talked to in the Melbourne area were telling me that they like it. They love the vibe. It's chill, it's quiet, it's affordable. It's not as hectic as other parts of the state. And these are not older retired people telling me this. These are young people that just like the vibe, like the city, so this is home to them. So the reception from the people that live here about their community is a pretty good one. Demographically, the only outlier here is Palm Bay. That's the only community that really has an infusion of people from South Florida migrant communities. Now, while looking through foreclosures in Brevard County to understand what's going on in this county, it is noteworthy that it isn't here in Viera, the people that bought all these suburban cookie cutter homes. This isn't the area that's being affected the most. At the core of the foreclosure problem in this part of Florida is affordable houses. The rising cost of insurance in the state of Florida as a whole and the cost of living in this state has put a lot of elderly residents under the burden to have to leave the state. Many of them did leave the state in time, but those who stayed behind are now facing a very difficult challenge. Insurance, food, and other cost of living is forcing people that are on a fixed income to decide between eating and paying the bills, and many people are choosing homelessness. Brevard County as a bulk is a poor and white county. Individuals who are into advanced age, who have now the inability to keep up with the rising cost of living because of their educational background, their age demographics and the opportunities that exist in their metropolitan area, leaving people with no other option but to simply walk away from their homes. At the core of foreclosures here is individuals who got outpriced from their homes by the rising cost of living, particularly Florida-based issues. This has led to a rampant homeless population, and this isn't a new issue in this county. This has been happening here for years, but over the last few years, it's been exaggerated by the inflation, leaving people with no other option. They just can't afford at their age, with their circumstances, to keep up with the rising cost of living, and that is sadly who's losing their homes in this part of Florida. It's interesting to see how the poor white rural parts of Florida ended up on this list of foreclosures when really these areas have the best job opportunities in the state, the most affordable housing, the lowest cost of insurance, yet they still can't manage to survive. These areas are also rampant with violence and crime, with higher overdose rates. Delinquency in general is out of control in these areas. And then for some reason that I don't understand, these poor rural white areas are also plagued with a large number of registered people. That's right, the ones you definitely do not want near your family. They love these, for some reason, right? These poor, look at this community here. Like every single one of those houses is a person that's registered. So that should just give you an idea. When you look at Brevard County, that's a lot of registered people. Some of them are even homeless on the streets with transient addresses. So that's like another fear factor to living in Brevard County. How many of these people exist in this community? Problems that are kind of endemic to the demographics of these communities, and a lot of people overlooked that when they move here. They later found out that these neighborhoods are actually pretty freaking scary places to live. But then on top of that, you also have people that their parents and grandparents moved to Florida. They pass away. They leave a little inheritance or a little house or something. Kids move in. They were just waiting for somebody to die so they can inherit something. So they never did anything with their lives. So now they end up in Florida. Eventually they lose everything they got and they end up on the streets. And this is kind of like the repeating story of a lot of the younger homeless people in Florida. They moved to Florida to take care of a parent or grandparent. When they passed away, they blew the money, and now they have nothing. That is like literally the story of like a good percentage of the people homeless out here. Even last time I was out here, which is way before this whole real estate bust happened, I was already pointing out some of the things that were wrong with this community in Brevard County. So to me, it isn't a surprise that things here are that bad. It is in some ways because, again, when you think about Florida's situation, two things come to mind: immigration and hurricanes. Talking about hurricanes and homelessness as well. About a year ago, here in Southwest Florida, we get hit by two hurricanes. This is Charlotte County, Florida. This is kind of an affordable county. Hundreds of homeless people in this area stayed outdoors for two hurricanes. And in Southwest Florida, it is now being confirmed by the medical examiner's office that some people who died in that time period seem to have been homeless people who perhaps could have died during the hurricanes. In other words, lives were lost in Southwest Florida. Now, after the hurricanes, these people didn't have water. Their tents, their homes out in the woods were all destroyed. And we did the best that we could to bring water and tents and whatever we could to the people that were living in these wooded areas in the aftermath of a hurricane, where people had lost the few things they had. Many people didn't have water. Many people were sleeping out in the open after the hurricane. It's a shame that a situation of this magnitude happens in the United States, but the homeless population in Florida is vastly overlooked. A few months ago, some zip codes here in Charlotte County had some of the highest foreclosure rates in the country. And these were houses that were kind of in rural areas, undeveloped land, where there was already a lot of homeless people living out in the woods. They literally built houses in places like this, and it's not a surprise that those houses don't have buyers. Bradenton, Florida. Exactly 1 year ago, two hurricanes back-to-back moved through the Bradenton area. Many people along the coast believe that this area was protected by an Indian or Native American superstition, and that this area, which hadn't got hit by hurricanes in over 100 years, was somehow protected by the Native Americans and it would never be destroyed by hurricanes. I don't think I've ever heard this mentioned anymore after the hurricanes, because without a doubt this area got hit not once but twice back to back. Now in Bradenton, Florida, many people lost their homes. And it's a miracle we didn't have more fatalities in this area during the hurricanes, because the most bizarre thing is that people ignored orders to evacuate, believing that this Native American thing would protect them. Well, it didn't, and Bradenton had a lot of hurricane damage. There was wind damage, and along the coastline, areas like Cortez had storm surge flooding. Water came inside the homes. It's salt water, it's corrosive. Everything it touches, it destroys it. And this has undoubtedly led to a serious economical crunch for a lot of people who didn't have insurance. Without a doubt, part of the situation in Bradenton revolves around hurricanes. A lot of older businesses were destroyed. The structures were just too old and the hurricanes damaged them. And today a lot of those businesses are closed. Now, Bradenton's been hurting economically for a few reasons. There's a large immigrant community here, predominantly Hondurans, and a lot of other people like Haitians and Cubans who had their recent status revoked. Hondurans are the largest immigrant group in this city, followed by Nicaraguans and Mexicans. With immigration changes, Bradenton has suffered tremendously. Many people have left the city, opening up vacancies in commercial and residential properties, and the city's economy is literally hurting. With fast-growing suburbs like Lakewood Ranch, most of the new home construction here is done by undocumented people, and this has led to a serious slowdown in the labor force as well. Bradenton is a city that's economically vulnerable to hurricanes and immigration law, so it isn't a surprise that in these times things are difficult here. The double combination of immigrations and hurricanes have really made Bradenton economically deprived recently, and the little economic boom that the city had a few years back is quickly coming to an end. You don't have to go far in Bradenton to see for rent signs in front of houses and for lease signs in front of businesses. On the coast of Bradenton, you have Anna Maria Island. After the hurricanes, the beach parking areas became landfill areas to unload all of the destruction that the hurricanes implemented on the city. The landmarks here, like the Rotten Row Pier, survived the first hurricane. Sadly, only 2 weeks later, another hurricane came back and hit the same area, and the Rotten Row Pier was gone. An iconic restaurant. And these iconic places drew a lot of people to this area. And along the coastline, many iconic restaurants have had to close their door. In the case of the Rotten Row Pier, reopening isn't even a possibility. This has crippled Bradenton economically. Next door to Bradenton is Sarasota. Now, Sarasota County was among those 5 places in Florida that had the most people moving in after COVID. As of now, for rent signs are plentiful in the city. Snowbirds aren't coming here after the hurricanes. Most of the hurricane cleanup is already done and the beaches look beautiful, but tourists haven't returned. A lot of Canadians used to come here, and as we know with politics, Canadians are boycotting Florida. Many people from Latin America used to come here, like Argentinians and Brazilians, and that was what kept this area busy during the off-season. For political reasons, they're not coming to Florida, so businesses are having to close their doors here. Nicaraguans are the largest migrant group here, and the wave of immigration changes led to a lot of people evicting the city of Sarasota. And today, those neighborhoods that had a large number of Nicaraguans, Hondurans, and Guatemalans are looking like ghost towns. Hurricane Milton and Helene left a path of destruction along the coast of Sarasota. Siesta Key in particular was heavy hit, with most of the island being completely underwater. Restaurants were closed forever, homes were destroyed. Thankfully, the cleanup has been incredible here and the city's starting to look decent, but the tourists are still under the perception that perhaps this area is a complete destruction zone. It's been 1 year. Things have come along fairly well, but the tourists haven't returned, and with many iconic restaurants gone forever, Siesta Key has been hurting since the hurricanes. Tampa, Florida, Hillsborough County, with an international airport to bring tourists to destinations like Siesta Key and Anna Maria. The recent changes in immigration law and the perception of people visiting the United States changing has meant an absolute destruction for Tampa's economy. Along the coastline, many people were renting properties as vacation rentals. That has been closed down completely because of hurricane damage along the coastline and the perception of international tourists not wanting to come to Florida. Tampa is a port city, and these changes in immigration law as well as international trade have crippled the city's economy, with many businesses closing down. bringing an influx of commercial and warehouse real estate back on the market in Tampa, and entire communities, those that were based on international trade, and of course, immigrant communities suffering greatly in Tampa. Businesses that were full today are vacant. Particularly hard hit are areas like Ruskin in the southern tip of Hillsborough County. This area has suffered tremendously from 2 hurricanes and a lot of new home construction. Lots of foreclosures happening right now in the Ruskin area. Most foreclosures in Hillsborough County are centered around 2 areas, one of them being Ruskin. This Gibson foreclosure is a prime example. It's right on the water. It looks like it had a lot of hurricane damage. This is one reason why Ruskin has had a lot of foreclosures. And the other reason is because it's on the outskirts of Tampa. It became kind of another affordable cookie cutter community where land was available, and they built hundreds and thousands of these types of houses. So the theme is the same. A suburban area that has more affordability. People can afford bigger houses, but then they buy the houses and they can't afford them anymore because the insurance is too high, the commute is too long, the air conditioning bill's 3 times what it would in an apartment because it's a giant freaking house. What brought this wave of foreclosures to Ruskin is exactly the same thing that brought a wave of foreclosures to Davenport. These are areas where people were moving to thinking that they would be more affordable, thinking that if they moved here they could buy that big suburban house they always wanted, but then not being able to keep up with it. Ruskin, Lakeland, Davenport, all these areas sit along the infamous I-4 corridor of traffic congestion. Sometimes I'll make a video that's really important, but it doesn't get that many views. A while back I made a video talking about how along the I-4 corridor, the building codes for hurricanes were significantly less in Southwest Florida, and many of the people buying homes in Lakeland, in Davenport, and in Ruskin were buying homes in an area that could potentially one day get hit by a hurricane, and the building codes here were so inferior that these houses, even though being far inland, would still be vulnerable to hurricanes. A lot of people moved to the I-4 corridor of Florida thinking that because they're further inland, they wouldn't have to deal with hurricane destruction. But the houses here are in different counties with different regulations that are not built to withstand hurricane damages. So when the hurricanes came, even though a lot of these people were far inland, their houses were completely devastated by these hurricanes. Some things are obvious, but not newsworthy or interesting. In the case of Tampa's suburban growth, you had a little bit of hurricane destruction. You had a whole lot of immigration madness. The other hotspot in Hillsborough County for foreclosures is an area known as Armenia. It's a Colombian and Cuban district. There's literally a line of foreclosed homes along that district, letting you know that the businesses left and the economy struggled, and now people can't keep their houses in this part of Tampa. Along the coast of Tampa Bay, Pinellas County, the storm surge came into areas like St. Petersburg Beach and Clearwater Beach, areas that haven't had significant hurricane damages in over 100 years. And the aftermath of the hurricanes along the coastline of Tampa were absolutely incredible. That led to the demise of the tourist industry in the Tampa area. Combine that with hostile politics on tourism, immigration changes here, all that brings the Tampa area to an absolute economic demise. Now, Tampa was a fast-growing area where a lot of homes were being built, and today there's still a lot of growth on the outskirts, but buyers are hard to come across. I think a sentiment shared evenly throughout the state by realtors is the fact that buyers want to get deals because there's so much inventory, but that's not exactly the way sellers are looking at it. Sellers are just completely unrealistic. When a house hits the market right now at a price that makes sense, it goes fairly quickly. But when houses are placed at prices that are inflated or artificial, buyers do not have a realistic understanding of the market. You have a lot of inventory, it continues to bubble, but that doesn't really create opportunities for buyers because, again, the perception, it hasn't caught up yet with the reality. So that's the situation right now in most of Florida, and the real estate market is really tanked in the state. Buyers are struggling to find deals despite the fact there's massive inventory, and sellers are having to have their houses sit on the market forever because what they're wanting to get for their properties is unrealistic. On top of that, people are starting to realize that the overhead and the cost of owning and maintaining properties in Florida with all the things that are happening. Hurricane damages happen in places that hadn't happened before. That scares people. The cost of ownership of these properties has increased, and immigration law plays a huge role into that as well, because you have less labor accessible, which means it costs more money to maintain your property. All that is a deterrent for people to want to continue to sign up for owning properties in Florida. As of now, I think the St. Petersburg area is one of those few areas that came out on top. Despite the fact that the coastline got destroyed by all these hurricanes, they have a large and vibrant downtown that's able to entertain tourists despite all the madness along the coastline. Because it's an older urban core that had nowhere to grow, there really wasn't the opportunity for St. Petersburg to be flooded with speculative home development. All that got pushed into places like Palmetto and Ruskin, so the crisis of St. Petersburg is happening somewhere else. Then there's places like LaBelle, Florida. This is the heartland of the state. Inland communities that have benefited from people leaving cities like Miami as they got expensive. They've also benefited from people thinking that if they move far inland, they're free from hurricane destruction, which isn't exactly true. This is Port LaBelle in Henry County. Recently, this flipped to be a majority Hispanic county, and a lot of them were undocumented, and even those that have papers here are still left economically deprived because this area thrives solely on new home construction in areas like Lehigh Acres or Port LaBelle. As this wave of new home construction comes to a freeze because of immigration law and all the other things happening in Florida, people are left without jobs, and this area here is going to see a massive wave of foreclosures as well. Already the amount of vacant real estate in LaBelle is absolutely frustrating. This community is going to go through a very difficult time in the future. Then you have places like Immokalee, Florida. It is believed that 90% of this town's population is undocumented. That's because Immokalee's economy is based on agriculture, and recently a lot of construction workers that work in the Naples area live here. Immokalee's condition is definitely sad. It's a city that's entire, like its history, its heritage, everything here is based around the Florida cowboy, agriculture, tomatoes, sugarcane. All these industries that thrive in South Florida depend heavily on migrant workers. It's been that way for practically hundreds of years. What's going to happen to a city whose majority of the population is undocumented? A lot of foreclosures? Not exactly, because everybody here owns their properties outright, so that's not an issue. Immokalee's economy is going to be destroyed, but is that going to lead to foreclosures? Not exactly. These industries kind of still exist, and only time will tell what will happen to a place like Immokalee, a city who is entirely based on immigration, in a time where immigration is literally being forced out of this country. There's really no clear definitive answer what's going to happen to a place like Immokalee, but despite the fact that real estate prices here are absolutely ridiculous, it is in South Florida, which means that there's always going to be somebody wanting to buy this land, and because it's just a poor and dangerous community, nobody really bought here. There's no real speculation, and most of the problems that we're facing in Florida are because of speculation, and there's not a lot of speculation in Immokalee. There's just demand, but that demand is going away. So what will happen to a place like Immokalee? Only time will tell. But this is the situation in Florida right now. Immigration laws, hurricanes, and other problems have led the state to a situation where it is now the worst real estate market in the country. And it doesn't look like things are going to get better anytime soon. In fact, I think we're only at the elementary base of what's about to come into a state that's heading into an absolute economical pit. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's video. If you found this information useful, consider giving us some love back and letting us know in the comment section how you feel about the information that we're providing you.